when someone does go down with an injury. What do you think, is the best thing for the player in that circumstance? So let's say 14 days into their hamstring return to play, and they do their hammy again. Do you think sending them home is the best place to give them space?
Firstly, I think you really need to, probably as a team, as a sort of medical performance team, be able to own it and then reflect on it and then be able to at least communicate roughly an answer. This is what we did and this is where we fell down. Sometimes it's as simple as we just over-programmed you on this day. We just let the chaos come in a little too much and we weren't quite ready for that, and that's our fault for letting that happen. And so I feel like having that, whether they do kind of depart from the club for a short period because they are so mentally drained, I would hope that there would be a bit of a kind of almost like this is what we're going to do next to really arrest this and change this. Or it doesn't have to be we know this will work. It just means this is what we're going to do different.
How do you sort of tackle that situation where obviously we're all part of that, like knowing that information, you can then influence your decision-making on reducing load or progressing the program faster or whatever it might be. But in this case, maybe you didn't know the information that would have been helpful. And then that's shared post-injury. How do you sort of tackle the situation?
In those sort of situations, usually I think the delivery of, like I said, this is what we're going to do next. I think there has to be an element of what else can you do in your side of things. Like if we have all sat in the suffering and had the discussion around how else we can push our boundaries in terms of what we might do in terms of, different ways of managing it and different strategies, then inevitably, for the whatever X amount of time that you're not at the club, what are you doing and how are you going to be driving that same sense of empowerment so that we both feel like we're on the same page?
In your experience, what have been the more common, I guess, factors that lead to or potentially increase the risk of reoccurrence with soft tissue in the AFL?
The big rocks, I would say, in rehab are going to be, a misdiagnosis. So inevitably, sometimes that meeting, again, the meeting where you're in the room and, we sort of pull up the scans again, and there might be sort of someone that, or the doc or one of the physios might say, well, actually it looks like, and you might even get another report from a separate radiologist or something like that, and you say, oh, there actually is a little bit of a tendon component there, just a subtle change in terms of the diagnostics, which might, certainly would infer potential, prognosis. So there's been a couple of occasions certainly where that's happened. I think not respecting the early healing, I guess if we're talking about in rehab, so again, right at the time, not respecting early healing is a really big one. So, inevitably the tissue's failed.
What about, accelerated sort of return to play compared to conservative? Like, what are some of your decision makings around whether you can go down the accelerated route?
Yeah, those conversations are always obviously a big group consultation, and they're definitely thrown up at times. And I think that I like the idea of having a really good sort of risk stratification or sort of framework side of things where, you look at some of the external consult, soft tissue experts who might consult on, let's say, problem case soft tissue injuries, and they're very methodical about how they will stratify the type of injury, then sort of stratifying to be high risk or low risk or sort of somewhere in the middle. And inevitably that we know there are some athletes that can cope quicker. But if someone it's their first soft tissue injury and they've got such a strong chronic loading base behind them, we know that what we've seen on, let's say, hypothetically day 14, rehab sessions have been able to sort of blow it out of the park. And for those guys, we're really confident that, just throwing out the 21-day kind of example, that even if things aren't quite perfectly healed, they'll find a way to cope with the demands, at least we hope.
What about communication, mate? You've mentioned a few times, obviously, the collaboration, clearly it's an important piece, the meetings that you have in decision-making and planning and programming. But what about, with yourself and the coaches? Are you in direct communication with them, or is it more high-performance manager? Equally with the players, do you update players on a weekly basis?
Like, I'll defer a lot of our kind of discussions about, not say availability, but the current status of our athletes will be sort of filtered through Phil Merriman, our high-performance manager, who is a great leader. He puts a lot of trust in his staff. So he will kind of, gather the information and deliver that ultimately to our coaching staff. That's our kind of system. In a broad sense, a reporting sense, I'll often have conversations, usually, let's say, with a medium-term injured athlete with their line coach about the sort of ways that we can, keep the athlete empowered to be working on their craft or their, their potential holes or areas that they can, attack a little bit more.